My heart was in my throat. It had been weeks since that stupid text message on my phone ruined everything. I was staying at Beth's, but even her spare room started to feel like a prison. The shame was suffocating, a relentless ache in my chest. I knew I needed to see him, to try and explain, even though I didn't have a damn clue how to make this better. One afternoon, I worked up the nerve to drive to his house. The one we'd picked out together, painted that warm yellow I loved so much. Walking up the path felt like a betrayal, my legs heavy. Every step closer squeezed the air from my lungs. I hesitated for what felt like an eternity outside the front door. Just the sight of it made me want to throw up, the memory of how he looked at me the last time I stood here making my stomach twist. Finally, I knocked, some pathetic little taps that even I could barely hear. He opened the door and for a second, just a second, I saw a flicker of surprise and maybe even relief in his eyes. Then it was gone. His face went stone cold. "What do you want?" It was barely above a whisper, but it cut through me. I need to talk to you." My voice was stupid and shaky. God, I was already regretting this. Why did I think I could come here and fix anything? "There's nothing left to say," he said, each word heavy. "You made your choice. Wait, please, just listen." I was practically begging, hating myself and hating him all at once. How had I fallen so damn far? He opened the door a tiny bit wider, but he didn't invite me in. "You've got 5 minutes." Each of those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. I stumbled through apologies, lame excuses about how things got out of hand and I never meant to hurt him. None of it felt real, even as I was saying it. I tried to explain how empty I'd felt, how Jake had made me feel alive, but it all sounded so hollow, so selfish. His eyes were so cold, so distant. He didn't buy a word. Finally, he cut me off. "You wasted those 5 minutes," he said, voice flat. "Get out." With that, he slammed the door in my face. I stood there, stunned. Then I turned and ran to my car, tears blurring my vision. It was over. Really, truly over. And it was all my fault. The weight of that crushed me as I drove away, leaving any hope of fixing this lying shattered on his doorstep. Beth wouldn't stop talking about getting back out there. "Girl, you gotta rip that band-aid off," she'd say, shoving another margarita at me. I could barely stand the taste of tequila lately, but I drank it anyway, chasing that numbing effect. One night, Beth dragged me to some trashy club filled with cocky guys who thought they were God's gift to women. I spent most of the time slumped over the bar, lost in an alcohol-fueled fog and trying to ignore the throbbing ache in my head. That's when I saw him. Not Jake, thank God. But someone familiar. A guy from high school, Ryan, I think? He was older now, more filled out, but still had that kind of goofy grin. And he was definitely looking at me. Not in a gross way, just interested, maybe even a little shy. Something snapped in me. Maybe it was the booze. Maybe the desperation to feel something other than miserable. Before I could talk myself out of it, I flashed him a smile back. One thing led to another. Flirting over cheap beers, sweaty bodies at the dance floor, the taste of his mouth on mine in the back of a dark Uber. The shame hit me like a truck the next morning. I was with someone else. Not my husband, not Jake, but someone who didn't know any of this mess. It was a different kind of betrayal, a new level of low I never thought I'd reach. And yet, there was a sick twist of excitement mixed in. It wasn't about Ryan, hardly even remembered him. It was the proof that I still could be desirable. I disgusted myself, and still, couldn't resist looking at my phone, half hoping, half dreading, that he might text. I knew this was getting out of control. It was like all my brakes were busted. I'd hurt the only man who ever truly loved me, and now I was dragging who knows how many others into my spiral. But I felt so damn powerless to stop. My heart raced every time I saw the letter M flash across my phone screen. My mom. At first, it was just concerned texts. "Are you doing okay, honey?" Or, "Missing you at Sunday dinner." But I knew the gentle probing would escalate into something more serious soon. She was relentless, my mom. One afternoon, her name popped up while I was at Beth's. I should have ignored it, but that nagging guilt, that relentless itch of anxiety, got the better of me. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Is everything all right?" The words seemed innocent enough, but the cheerful emojis and exclamation points couldn't hide the worry in her voice. Panic flooded through me. I hadn't even told Beth about my parents knowing. Just busy. Crazy time at work. I typed out a quick lie, hating the way my fingers fumbled over the keyboard. Beth shot me a worried look. You can't hide from them forever, she said, which was rich coming from her, considering she spent days dodging her own mom's calls. Later that night, I found myself fixating on the conversation. My mom was the best, patient, understanding, the kind of mom every girl wants. Lying to her made me feel like the lowest kind of scum. I could practically hear her voice, sad and disappointed, asking me what happened to the little girl she raised. The girl who always told the truth. That night I finally broke. I called her, voice trembling, and spilled everything. The affair, the lies, my husband kicking me out. She was silent on the other end for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with tears. Come home, she said, just that. The next day, I packed my pathetic little bag and went home. I didn't know what to expect, whether they'd yell at me or offer awkward hugs. But when I walked through that door, my dad took one look at my tear-streaked face, pulled me in tight, and said, Welcome home, baby girl. Nothing else needed to be said. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe things could be okay, eventually. The first week back at my parents' house was a blur. Sleeping in my old childhood bedroom felt surreal, like I hit rewind on some terrible movie. Mom fussed over me, making my favorite comfort foods and offering endless cups of tea. Her kind gestures couldn't mask the sadness in her eyes, though. Dad took long walks every evening, his shoulders slumped with disappointment. I wanted to tell them it would be okay, but I couldn't even convince myself. One morning, the doorbell rang, and my whole body tensed. I held my breath as Mom opened the door. My husband stood there, looking tired and older than I remembered. His eyes, the ones that used to look at me with nothing but love, were now cold and distant. Can we talk? He said. The question wasn't really a question. My parents exchanged a worried look and stepped away without a word. He followed me to my room, and I shut the door. The silence echoed between us, a thick, suffocating blanket. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. I don't want to drag this out. The lawyers already sent you the papers. Papers. Divorce papers. Even though I knew this was coming, it felt like a physical blow, sharp pain in my chest. I never wanted it to, I started, but he cut me off. Why? The word hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Why did you do this? 1,000 answers flashed through my mind. The excitement, the attention, feeling desired and alive again. All of it sounded so empty and stupid compared to the devastation I saw in his eyes. Disgust, a touch of pity, and something else. A flicker of a wound deeper than I could understand. I don't know, I choked out, which was the truth, the pathetic, cowardly truth. I messed up, badly. He stared at me for a long, painful moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he simply nodded. He didn't offer forgiveness, didn't even raise his voice. He just turned and walked out. With every step down the hallway, it felt like any chance at fixing it, any hope for the future we'd planned, walked out with him. I fell on my bed and sobbed, a broken, wretched sound that filled the quiet room. Weeks blurred into an endless cycle of misery. Going back to work was out of the question. I couldn't face the whispers and pitying stares. Mom tried to drag me out for walks, Dad suggesting I get a hobby, anything to keep busy. But I just wanted to curl up into a ball and let the shame swallow me whole. Then, one day, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. My name was scrawled across the front in an unfamiliar, overly formal handwriting. My heart hammered in my chest as I tore it open. Inside were a stack of documents, with words like, summons, and petition, jumping out at me. Divorce papers were one thing, seeing them in black and white was another. My husband wanted this over with, and fast. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me, and I bolted to the bathroom, emptying the measly contents of my stomach. Beth found me on the bathroom floor, clutching the papers. She read them, her eyes widening with every page. This is real, she breathed, stating the obvious. You have to do something. Like what? Hire a fancy lawyer I can't afford? I snapped, the bitterness bubbling up. He'll probably take everything. My voice trailed off. I realized I barely cared about the house or our savings. What terrified me was losing him completely, some judge finalizing the end of what I'd so carelessly broken. You need to fight back, Beth said, her voice surprisingly firm. But there was no fight left in me. I'd already lost everything that mattered. Finally, the panic subsided, and a crushing numbness took its place. I called my husband, well, my soon-to-be ex-husband. I had to start getting used to that. His lawyer had given me his new number. His voice when he answered was cold, distant. I managed to choke out the words, "I'll sign whatever you want. Just make it stop." He didn't say anything, just hung up. There was no big fight, no dramatic showdown. Just me, signing my marriage away on a worn-out kitchen table with a cheap pen. It felt like a sick joke, the way life's most important moments could be reduced to paperwork and empty signatures. Life after the divorce papers felt even more empty than before. I was a ghost moving aimlessly through my parents' house. They barely recognized the woman I'd become, sullen, withdrawn, a shadow of their vibrant daughter. One afternoon, Mom sat next to me on the couch, her hand gently stroking my hair. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice soft, "you can't keep doing this to yourself. You need to get out of your own head." I wanted to tell her to go away, that she didn't understand, but her eyes held such a mix of concern and determination that I couldn't speak. "Your Aunt Lucy," she hesitated, "well, she lives alone now. Her little bakery could use some help. It would be a distraction, something to focus on." I just stared at the worn carpet, unable to imagine myself doing anything, especially not facing customers with the weight of my shame hanging over me. Yet, the alternative, endless days spent moping, seemed unbearable. With a sigh of resignation, I agreed. Maybe a bit of mindless work was exactly what I needed. The next day, I found myself driving to my aunt's town, a quaint little place I hadn't visited since childhood. Lucy was older, grayer, but her smile still held the same warmth I remembered. She welcomed me with a tight hug and a flurry of questions, mostly about how I was doing, which I politely sidestepped. When she led me into the bakery, a wave of nostalgia hit me, the sweet smell of cinnamon, the soft hum of the ovens. My tasks were simple at first: measuring flour, kneading dough, icing cupcakes. It was repetitive, almost soothing, requiring just enough attention to distract me from the constant churning in my head. Some days, customers would smile at the girl behind the counter, the one with sad eyes and tired movements. They didn't know my story, didn't see the mess I'd made of my life. Maybe a little anonymity was exactly what I needed in order to start picking up the pieces. The bakery became a strange sanctuary. Even with the small town gossip swirling outside its doors, the steady rhythm of baking soothed something within me. Aunt Lucy was a surprisingly good, if unintentional, therapist. She didn't push me to talk about what happened, but between frosting batches of cookies and boxing up orders, she'd share little bits of wisdom. "Sometimes, the biggest messes are what make the best bread," she'd say while kneading a stubborn lump of dough. Or, "A cracked bowl still holds soup just fine," with a wink. I wasn't sure if she knew what had happened, but her quiet acceptance meant more than any words. One afternoon, a familiar figure walked into the shop. My stomach clenched. Jake. He looked different, shabbier, his usual cocky grin replaced by something like desperation. My first instinct was to run, to hide in the back room. But something held me back. I squared my shoulders, ready to tell him to get lost. His voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly soft, almost hesitant. "Look, I know I messed up. I was an idiot and you think that changes anything?" I cut him off, the bitterness I'd tried to bury rising to the surface. "What do you want, Jake?" He shifted from foot to foot, looking uncomfortable. "Honestly, I just wanted to see how you're doing." I scoffed. Funny way of showing it, disappearing when things got messy. "Things got messy?" He echoed. "You blew up your whole life." "My girlfriend kicked me out. I lost my job." He trailed off, then looked at me, a flicker of something like resentment in his eyes. "We both made mistakes." The sheer nerve of it rendered me speechless for a moment. Finally, I regained my voice. "Get out." It was a simple statement, my tone cold. He hesitated, then turned and slunk out of the bakery. Watching him go, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Finally, I was the one in control. I wouldn't let him back in, not when I was barely starting to rebuild what he'd helped shatter. Weeks turned into months at the bakery, and gradually, something shifted inside of me. Kneading dough felt less like therapy and more like a second nature. Aunt Lucy started trusting me with more responsibilities. opening the shop, decorating elaborate birthday cakes, even chatting with regular customers. I was finding a rhythm again, a routine far removed from the chaotic mess I'd left behind. Then one day, the bubble burst. A group of women I vaguely recognized from high school walked in, giggling amongst themselves. They were customers, nothing more, but when they saw me behind the counter, their laughter went silent. The judgment was clear in their eyes. Their pity mixed with an odd sort of excitement, like they couldn't wait to recount the story of how they'd seen me, the town's scarlet woman, reduced to selling cupcakes. My face burned, shame and rage twisting in my gut. It took all my strength to smile politely and take their order. Once they left, I hurried to the back room, tears welling up in my eyes. All those weeks of feeling somewhat normal disintegrated in an instant. Later, Aunt Lucy found me slumped against the giant flour bags, silently sobbing. She didn't ask questions, just held me as I cried, then handed me a cup of strong, sweet tea. "You know," she said finally, her voice gentle, "it'll get easier. The gossip will die down, people have short memories. And some, well, you learn who your real friends are." That's when I told her everything. Not just about Jake and the affair, but the crushing guilt, the emptiness. All poured out in a messy, tearful confession. I expected her to be disappointed, maybe even disgusted. But her eyes just filled with sadness. "Oh, honey," she sighed, stroking my hair. "You made a foolish mistake, true. But you're not a bad person. You're just hurting." Her kindness broke me even further. For the first time in forever, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I might be worthy of forgiveness, even if I couldn't yet offer it to myself.